Today I had my OR experience at Midland Hospital and I got to see a few different things. So I started my day with GI. So I got to see two colonoscopies and then I got to see this guy was having troubles breathing. So they stuck a camera down his throat to see what was causing all of that, which ended up being his stomach was all pushed up by his diaphragm and that was closing it off, causing him shortness of breath. And then I got to see a hysterectomy, and I also got to see a lady be diagnosed with endometriosis. So, the role of the registered nurse. So, pre op, the nurse goes and gets the patient and wheels them into the room. And the circulating nurse is in charge of getting everything ready. She was making sure all the supplies were out, the patient was ready, she's making sure the patient was sterile. She would clean them even for the hysterectomy, she cleaned them first before the surgeons came in. And she would also make sure everything was covered up that was supposed to be covered up and that the prepping area was exposed and ready to go for when the doctors came in. So, the intra op phase, the circulating nurse was very busy. She was running around making sure everything was in the right spot. If the doctors needed anything, she was in charge of moving the monitors around, which I found that to be something like a big deal today because there was a lot of residents in the room. So she was always constantly moving it so that the residents could see and the doctor could see. She was also in charge of making sure the camera was on when they wanted the camera on. And she had to get a cup ready because when they removed the cervix and the uterus and the fallopian tubes, she had to put them into a cup and send them down to patho. So she was in charge of doing all that while charting also. And she also helped out the scrub nurse with counting all the sponges and equipment that the nurses needed help with. Okay, so then after the procedure happens, they go straight to the PACU, which ended up being just right across the hallway, which worked out really nice. So usually the circulating nurse went and the anesthesiologist went, and they wheeled it across the room to the PACU nurse, and that's where a different nurse would take over. And so the circulating nurse was good about giving a report to the PACU nurse, saying everything that happened in surgery, what needs to be happening here, and different things like that. The anesthesiologist was good about saying what pain medications they got and what he's going to order for them to use in this phase. So then I also got to stay in the PACU nurse, or stay with the PACU nurse for a while just to see how that went. And they were mainly in charge of making sure the patient's pain was under control and also helping wake up the patient. Okay, so the circulating nurse's role was very important. She's the one that was running around the room, getting anything and moving anything that needed to be moved while charting also. I felt like the circulating nurse was under a lot of pressure in a way. She was a super nice woman and was amazing about stopping and making sure that I was learning, and if I had any questions, she would answer them for me. But I found it rude because the doctors came off kind of I don't know, they came off rude to me and were rude to her. Like if the monitor wasn't in the right spot, they were like, no, 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 I don't want it there. Like I want it over here. And so she was trying to maneuver that. And if something wasn't perfect, they were really criticizing her on it. So I felt really bad for her at times. But I don't think I would want to be a circulating nurse unless I really knew my way around the OR because they were like, get this, or I need this, I want this moved. And I don't know, I feel like you just really have to know each doctor and what they preferred and just kind of, I don't know, it seemed like a very stressful job to me. But she did a really good job about controlling her emotions and just taking it and, doing her job. So, protecting the patients, the circulating nurse did a very good job about this. She's the one that started the timeout process. They also had a huge board in the room that went over each of the steps about the timeout process and the post-op, like what was supposed to happen when the patient's waking up, and the role of the doctor, the nurse, and the anesthesiologist. So I found that really interesting because it was in all the OR rooms. They also used a marker board that was up on the wall, and they would write different notes on there, like what the procedure was, the doctor, everyone in the room. and they would also include the tools that were being used. So there was like 7 sponges, 4 needles, and then they would check with the board after the procedure was done to make sure they had all the equipment that they started with. So policies and procedures that ensured safety of the patient during surgery, I feel like the timeout was the big thing, and then also the circulating nurse giving report to the PACU nurse after surgery was a big thing too. So how was the timeout done and who participated in it? So the timeout was they did this before they started the procedure, making sure they had the right patient and all the steps to that. And in the room, the nurse, the doctor, the anesthesiologist, and a few residents were in the room during the timeout. They even had a discussion in the room about who starts the timeout. And the doctors were like, usually I just say, you do the timeout, or different things like that. It's just kind of what they preferred, but I found that very interesting that that happened to come up today. Patient's privacy. They were very respectful of the patient. They always kept the patient covered up, like parts that didn't need to be exposed was covered up. And after surgery, they were like quickly washed them up, got a warm blanket on them, and were very and really tried to be there for the patient. Like when they're waking up, like, you're doing a really good job, just take some deep breaths. They were very encouraging, telling her that she did a very good job and different things like that, and that the surgery was over. But I didn't see anything that I would disagree with. I thought the privacy was good and they protected it. So the sponge count. So how was this done? The circulating nurse and the scrub nurse were the two that participated in it today that I saw. So first before they started the procedure, they would do a count and write it up on the board. And then the two nurses would count everything together after the surgery was done to make sure they had everything. And then also before the circulating nurse would send down like the fallopian tubes or the uterus, she would check with the sponge nurse to make sure she had all the information right that was on the sheet. So they really worked good together. Um, so my overall experience, I liked it a lot. I learned a whole bunch of stuff. My nurse was amazing that I got to follow with today, and she was a great teacher, and I loved it.